Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the first episode of the Whiskey Diaries at Death and Taxes. My name is Martin Langs. I'm going to be your host for the next few episodes. What we're going to try and do, and I'm going to explain to you about how this format is going to work, is trying to basically enjoy whiskey, talk to you about a little bit of the whiskey themselves, and talk about the distillery, show you a little bit of history and why they make the whiskey. Every single whiskey is very different on its own, so each distillery has its own little quirky stories, where they come from, and a little bit of history. The first whiskey that we're going to try today is going to be Balvenie. The reason why is because it's one of those distilleries that has a lot of rich history, and also David Stewart that created this whiskey was a pioneer in basically cask finishing that we're going to talk about in a little bit later on. A little bit of the story of the Balvenie. It was created in 1892. Basically 5 years after opening Glenfiddich. It's part of the William Grant's family, in which they own also Glenfiddich, as I said, Balvenie. They own cellar Jerry rum, Hendricks. They do a blended whiskey that is called Grant's that is really good as well. But the reason why we're focusing on this one is because I believe that this is a whiskey that you can have in any occasion at any given time. It's absolutely stunning, and they produce a very, very quirky different types of whiskies with different cask finishes. They're not afraid to experiment, and they're not afraid to show what they can create. The other thing about the distillery itself as well is that when it was created in 1892, it was a castle that was actually taken over and transformed into a distillery. They have their own cooperage, which means they can fix and produce their own barrels. They also have a malting floor, which means that they can produce their own grain and malt their own grain. Unfortunately, because of the amount of whiskey that they produce, they only put about 2 to 3% of the grain that goes into the actual bottle. The rest of it they got from other massive malting houses, like a lot of whiskies do. Now, the reason again why I picked this one is because David Stewart pioneered cask finishing. Cask finishing is basically what you do is you put the whiskey in an original barrel. In this case, most of the times it's American oak, and then after a certain period of time, each distillery has its own period of time. In this particular case, is 6 years. They take the whiskey out and they put it in another cask. In this case, sherry cask. So the sherry cask comes from Jerez in Spain. Is a fortified type of wine in which the wine gets put into barrels, aged, and because barrels actually tend to breathe and absorb the liquid and then basically push it out depending on the weather, the barrel actually absorbs of the flavors from the sherry. Now the whiskey gets put into there, and the sherry cask is actually created by a different type of wood. So the bourbon cask is created by using American oak, Quercus alba. And what the American oak does to a whiskey is give sweet notes like vanilla and toffee, and like it's a lot more sweeter. Now the European oak that gets used to age sherry in it gives the whiskey a lot more tannins and a lot more like cloves and cinnamon, just a little bit more spicy, if you want to put it that way. So you get I personally believe it's a perfect balance between sweetness and spiciness. And also, it is an incredible, affordable whiskey. Now, the Balvenie has a very, very extensive range. They produce, because they like to experiment so much, they can produce a lot of various bottlings. The core range that you can get basically anywhere in Australia, Dan Murphy's, First Choice, whatever you want. It would be the 12-year-old Doublewood, as I said, the double maturation. Then you can get the 14-year-old Caribbean cask, which the Caribbean cask is basically the finishing cask is rum cask from the Caribbean. They bring the barrels with the rum all the way to Scotland, then they emptied it, and then they put the whiskey in there. I believe that it's a 7-year-old maturation in American oak, and then another 7 years on the Caribbean cask. So that creates a whiskey that is a little bit more sweetness finishes that comes from the rum casks. Now, the other one that is a core range is a 17-year-old Doublewood, very similar to the double maturation of the 12, but obviously aged longer. Then you got the 21-year-old PortWood. They do a version of this one that is actually Madeira casks, but this PortWood cask means that it comes from port, another type of fortified wine that is a lot sweeter. It's a beautiful whiskey, that one, and for the price as well, I think it goes for about $240. You cannot get a 21-year-old whiskey that it tastes as good as that for that price. And then you've got the Balvenie 30-year-old. That is, again, a special whiskey. You want to use it on special occasions, but it's absolutely stunning. Now, the one that we're going to try today is going to be the Balvenie 12, because as I said, again, it's an incredible whiskey that you can have for any occasion whatsoever. Now, this is going to be part of the first episode. We're not going to go through this every single time we try a whiskey, but we're going to go in this one just to show you how to actually taste whiskey. Now, the reason why I say this is because it's very different to actually tasting wine. Wine has about 12-13% alcohol, so it doesn't really matter how you smell it. But because whiskey goes from 40 up to like 69%, what you want to do, you want to be careful that you don't put your nose straight into the glass, because it's going to numb it, and then you're not going to be able to taste a lot. So what you want to do, obviously, I love that noise. It's great. It's the sound of a great whiskey. And then you just obviously pour it about 30 mils if you want, or whatever you want really. And then, contrary to popular belief, you don't want to swirl it too much. You just want to let it sit for a second and then let the alcohol actually evaporate a little bit. And then you want to just smell it from the top. You smell it once, and then after that you want to open your mouth a little bit just to make sure that your nose is connecting to your actual mouth. And you smell it again. What that does is actually connects and allows the aroma to actually go to your mouth as well. Now, once you do that, then you give it a quick sip without adding anything to the whiskey. This means that it allows you to basically give it a rating. The reason why I give a rating is because we're going to add water to the whiskey later on. Now, if you drink a lot of whiskey, or if this is the first time trying a whiskey, you want to give it a scale from 1 to 10. This is a 40% alcohol whiskey, so it's not that strong. So for me, that's a 5. So what I do is I count 5, and then I give it 1 for luck, and then I'm going to add 6 drops of water. Now, the reason why you add water to a whiskey is not to dilute it or just to reduce the ABV. It's basically because the whiskey has actually oils that carry through the distillation. So what the water does is actually interacts with those oils and opens it up. And also, not only that, but it does dilute it a little bit, so it lowers a little bit of the ABV, and that allows it to smell a lot more of the whiskey instead of just the ethanol. So you go like that, and then so I gave it a 5. If you give it a 7 or an 8, it's 8 plus 1. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for luck, and there you go. At this time, yes, you want to give it a little swirl so the water actually interacts with the whiskey, and then you give it another smell. And then you can actually taste and feel how the whiskey actually open up, and all the flavors that we're hidden behind the alcohol come through. So in this case, a lot of the toffee, a lot of the vanilla, that was all that sweetness that comes from American oak was hidden behind the alcohol. Then you give it another smell. Beautiful. And now you can actually taste, again, a lot of the spices as well that were hidden behind the alcohol as well comes through. Christmas pudding, cloves, cinnamon. It's up to you to figure out what flavors. It's a very subjective thing, because obviously you're the one tasting it. But it's a great whiskey to enjoy anytime or any day, particularly in the festive seasons. Now, thank you very much for listening. This is going to be our first episode, and the next ones we're going to be trying more and more exotics and interesting whiskies. Slan Jabbar, and we'll see you next time.